Japan, an archipelago nation of over 125 million people, presents one of the most compelling demographic and geographic paradoxes in the modern world. On one hand, it is globally recognized for its hyperdense, pulsating megacities. Tokyo, with its sprawling metropolitan area, stands as a testament to human concentration. The image of the Shibuya Scramble Crossing, a vortex of humanity, is often the defining visual of the country. On the other hand, a startling, yet statistically accurate claim persists. Approximately 90% of Japan's land area is sparsely populated, or, in the vernacular of viral media, empty. This apparent contradiction, a nation simultaneously one of the most crowded and one of the most vacant, is not a mere statistical anomaly. It is the profound result of a powerful collision between three fundamental forces: the immutable constraints of its geography, the deliberate trajectory of its historical economic development, and the accelerating crisis of its demographics. To understand why 90% of Japan is empty is to understand the very structure of Japanese society, its past choices, and its uncertain future. This article will delve into the quantitative data and the socioeconomic factors that have created this radical concentration of life, leaving the vast majority of the country a silent, beautiful, and increasingly abandoned landscape. The most significant, non-negotiable factor dictating Japan's population distribution is its physical geography. The Japanese archipelago is a chain of volcanic islands situated on the Pacific Ring of Fire, resulting in a terrain that is overwhelmingly rugged and mountainous. Quantitative data consistently reveals the severity of this geographical constraint. According to various government and academic sources, between 70% and 75% of Japan's total land area is composed of mountains, hills, and heavily forested terrain. 1-2. This land is not only unsuitable for large-scale agriculture, but is also highly challenging for urban development due to steep slopes, seismic activity, and the risk of landslides. This means that the entire population of Japan is effectively confined to the remaining 25% to 30% of the land. However, the true habitable area is even smaller. When considering only the flat plains, river basins, and coastal areas suitable for dense, modern urban centers, often referred to as densely inhabited districts, DID, the available land shrinks to approximately 12% to 15% of the total area. 3. This geographical reality is the key to resolving the paradox of Japan's density. The overall population density, calculated across the entire landmass, is approximately 338 people per square kilometer. 4. This figure already places Japan among the world's more densely populated nations. However, the true measure of concentration is found when calculating the density based only on the habitable land. When the population is divided by the limited area of flat, usable land, the density figure soars to over 1,500 persons per square kilometer. 5. In the most concentrated urban centers, such as the Tokyo metropolitan area, the density can exceed 6,000 people per square kilometer. The emptiness of 90% of Japan is therefore a direct, physical consequence of the fact that the remaining 10% is forced to accommodate virtually the entire national population. The mountains act as an insurmountable barrier, pushing human settlement into a narrow, compressed corridor. While geography established the physical boundaries for settlement, the historical and economic forces of the 20th century determine the precise pattern of concentration. The post-war economic miracle, coupled with centralized planning, acted as a powerful magnet, pulling the population away from the countryside and into a few select urban hubs. Following the devastation of World War II, Japan embarked on a rapid and aggressive program of industrialization and economic growth. This process was heavily centralized, with government and corporate investment overwhelmingly focused on the major cities, particularly those along the Pacific coast. The promise of employment, higher wages, better education, and superior infrastructure, the hallmarks of modernity, triggered one of the most significant internal migrations in Japanese history. Millions of young people left their ancestral homes in rural villages, inaka, and smaller towns to seek opportunities in the burgeoning industrial centers. This movement was not merely a shift in residence, It was a fundamental societal transformation, prioritizing economic efficiency and urban convenience over traditional, decentralized living. This period, spanning from the 1950s through the 1970s, saw a dramatic demographic shift, emptying out entire valleys and mountain communities that had sustained themselves for centuries through agriculture and forestry. The government's focus on heavy industry and export-led growth meant that the traditional economic base of the Inaka was systematically undermined, making the move to the Toshi city a necessity rather than a choice for many. This economic concentration gave rise to the Taiheiyo Belt, Pacific Belt, a massive megalopolis that stretches approximately 1,200 kilometers from the Kanto region, Tokyo, southwest to the Fukuoka prefecture in Kyushu. This corridor encompasses the major urban centers of Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Kyoto, Osaka, and Kobe. The statistics on the Taiheiyo Belt are staggering and illustrate the extent of the concentration. The belt, which occupies a tiny fraction of Japan's total land area, is home to approximately 65% of the entire Japanese population, representing around 80 million people. It accounts for a disproportionately high percentage of the nation's gross domestic product, GDP, and industrial output, often cited as generating over 70% of the country's economic activity. It is the hub of Japan's most advanced infrastructure, including the Shinkansen bullet train network, which seamlessly connects these major cities, further reinforcing the ease of movement and commerce within this concentrated zone. The creation of the Taiheiyo Belt solidified the pattern of extreme concentration. The economic vitality of the nation became intrinsically linked to this narrow corridor, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Investment follows people, and people follow investment. This left the remaining 90% of the country, the mountainous interior and the peripheral rural regions, increasingly marginalized and economically stagnant. The empty land became not just geographically constrained, but also economically abandoned. The sheer scale of this economic and human clustering is a phenomenon rarely seen elsewhere in the developed world, where population distribution tends to be more dispersed. The final, and perhaps most urgent, factor contributing to Japan's emptiness is its unique demographic crisis. The combination of a rapidly aging population and a persistently low birth rate is causing the national population to shrink. Crucially, this decline is not uniform. It is accelerating the depopulation of the rural areas, turning the empty land into empty communities. Japan's population peaked in 2008 and has been in decline ever since. By 2023, the total population had fallen to approximately 124.3 million. More alarming is the age structure. Japan has the highest proportion of elderly citizens in the world, with over 29% of the population aged 65 or older. This demographic reality is often visualized as an inverted population pyramid, where the base of young people is far smaller than the top of elderly citizens. This demographic shift is felt most acutely in the rural regions. The younger generations who migrated to the cities in the post-war era are now having fewer children, and those children are, in turn, remaining in the urban centers. This creates a devastating feedback loop in the countryside. The remaining population in rural towns is predominantly elderly, leading to a high dependency ratio where fewer working-age people support a growing number of retirees. As the population shrinks, local services, schools, hospitals, post offices, and shops become economically unviable and are forced to close. The closure of a local school, for instance, is often the final nail in the coffin for a community, as it removes the last incentive for young families to stay or move there. The closure of essential services makes the area less attractive for young families, pushing the few remaining working-age residents to move to the cities, where services are concentrated. The result is the proliferation of Genkai Shiraku, or limited communities, which are villages where over half the population is aged 65 or older, making it difficult to maintain basic community functions such as snow removal, local festivals, and fire safety. These communities are on the brink of collapse, destined to become the next wave of ghost towns, a phenomenon known as Shometsu Shiraku, or extinct communities. The most visible manifestation of this rural decline is the ikiya, or vacant house, crisis. Despite the high population density in the cities, Japan is grappling with a massive surplus of empty homes. As of the latest comprehensive surveys, Japan has over 9 million vacant properties, representing approximately 13.8% of the total housing stock. This figure is projected to rise to over 10 million by 2030, and some estimates suggest that by 2040, nearly 30% of all homes in Japan could be vacant. While some vacant homes exist in urban areas, the problem is overwhelmingly concentrated in the rural and peripheral regions, where the vacancy rate in some towns exceeds 50%. The reasons for this surplus are complex and deeply rooted in Japanese culture and law. When an elderly relative passes away, the property is often inherited by their children or grandchildren who live in the cities. These heirs have no desire to return to the countryside, but they are reluctant to sell due to sentimental attachment, the complexity of dividing the asset among multiple heirs, or the simple fact that the property is worth so little that the effort of selling is not worthwhile. Under Japanese property tax law, the tax rate on land with a standing residential structure is significantly lower than the tax rate on vacant land. This perverse incentive encourages owners to let dilapidated houses stand empty rather than demolish them, as demolition would result in a massive tax hike. This policy, originally intended to prevent urban sprawl, now actively contributes to the blight of abandoned homes. The cost of demolishing an old, often poorly maintained, wooden house can be prohibitively expensive, sometimes exceeding the potential sale price of the land. Furthermore, the traditional Japanese preference for new construction means that older homes, even if structurally sound, are often viewed as having little to no market value. In many remote areas, there is simply no market for the property, regardless of the price. The lack of local employment and essential services makes the location unappealing to potential buyers. The IKEA crisis means that the emptiness is no longer confined to the mountains. It is creeping into the villages and towns themselves. The 90% of empty land is now being joined by a growing number of empty houses, creating a powerful visual symbol of the nation's demographic challenges. The extreme concentration of the Japanese population has profound effects that extend beyond mere statistics, shaping the nation's social, political, and cultural landscape. The demographic and economic disparities have created a stark and growing divide between the urban centers, Toshi, and the rural countryside, Inaka. This divide fuels political tension, as rural voters often feel their needs, such as subsidies for agriculture, infrastructure maintenance, and support for local services, are neglected in favor of urban priorities. The concentration of political power and media attention in Tokyo further exacerbates this feeling of marginalization in the empty regions. This has led to a phenomenon known as Tokyo-centrism, where the national narrative and policy decisions are overwhelmingly shaped by the needs and perspectives of the capital, often at the expense of the periphery. The concentration of 65% of the population into the narrow Taiheiyo belt, which is largely coastal, also creates significant environmental and disaster risks. The belt lies in one of the world's most seismically active zones. A major earthquake striking the Tokyo or Nankai Trough regions could paralyze the nation's economy and infrastructure, affecting the majority of the population simultaneously. The sheer density of population and infrastructure in these areas means that the potential for catastrophic loss of life and economic disruption is magnified exponentially. Being coastal, the major population centers are highly vulnerable to tsunamis and storm surges, as tragically demonstrated by the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. The low-lying coastal plains, which are the most habitable, are also the most exposed to these natural hazards. The intense demand for land in the habitable zones leads to continuous pressure on the remaining natural spaces, requiring complex and expensive engineering solutions to manage water, waste, and transportation. This pressure also contributes to the high cost of living and the phenomenon of commuter hell in the major metropolitan areas. Paradoxically, the empty 90% of the land, while sparsely populated, plays a crucial role in mitigating these risks by acting as a natural buffer, providing watershed management and maintaining biodiversity. The health of the empty land is vital for the sustainability of the crowded 10%. For example, The vast forests of the interior are essential for managing water resources and preventing erosion, which could otherwise threaten the densely populated plains below. The Japanese government is acutely aware of the challenges posed by the extreme population concentration and the accelerating rural decline. Various policies and initiatives have been implemented to encourage decentralization and revitalize the empty regions, though success has been mixed. One of the most direct strategies to address the Akiya crisis is the establishment of Akiya banks. These are online databases, often run by local municipal governments, that list vacant properties. The goal is to connect potential buyers, often young families, remote workers, or foreign residents, with owners of vacant homes. In many cases, the properties are offered for extremely low prices, sometimes even for free, with the caveat that the buyer must commit to renovating and living in the home. Furthermore, many local governments offer generous subsidies for renovation costs and provide financial incentives for families with children to relocate to the area, sometimes offering up to 3 million yen, approximate $20,000 for a family to move. While these programs have generated significant international interest and have successfully brought new life to some villages, the overall impact remains limited. The fundamental challenges that drove the original exodus, the lack of local, high-paying jobs, the distance from major medical facilities, and the closure of schools, often outweigh the appeal of a cheap house. Furthermore, many Akiya require extensive and costly renovations to meet modern living standards, a cost that often negates the initial low purchase price. The success of these banks is often localized, dependent on a few dedicated local officials and the unique charm or proximity of the town to a larger center. The broader policy framework is known as Chihosashi, or regional revitalization. This initiative, launched in the mid-2010s, aims to reverse the trend of population decline and concentration in Tokyo. Its core strategies include promoting local industries, supporting small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, and encouraging the relocation of corporate headquarters from Tokyo through tax incentives, investing in high-speed internet access, and improving transportation links to make remote work and commuting more feasible, and leveraging the natural beauty and unique local products of the countryside to boost tourism and high-value agriculture, such as specialized sake brewing or artisanal crafts. However, a parallel and somewhat contradictory strategy has emerged: the compact city model. Recognizing that many small towns cannot sustain their current sprawling footprint with a shrinking population, the compact city policy encourages local governments to concentrate essential services, housing, and infrastructure into a smaller, central area. This involves moving residents from the most remote, unsustainable Genkai Shiraku into the core of the town. While economically rational, this policy implicitly accepts the abandonment of the most peripheral areas, effectively conceding more of the 90% to emptiness. It is a strategy of managed retreat, prioritizing the sustainability of the core over the preservation of the periphery. Beyond the economic and demographic statistics, the emptying of the Japanese countryside carries a profound philosophical and cultural cost. The traditional Japanese relationship with the land, deeply rooted in Shinto beliefs and agricultural practices, is being severed. The Inaka is the repository of much of Japan's intangible cultural heritage. Local festivals, matsuri, unique dialects, traditional crafts, and specific agricultural techniques are all tied to the physical landscape and the continuity of the community. As the elderly population passes away and the communities dissolve, this local knowledge and these traditions are lost forever. The Akiya are not just empty houses. They are the physical remnants of a way of life that is rapidly disappearing. The concept of Satoyama, the managed, semi-natural woodlands and farmlands near human settlements, is a prime example. These landscapes, which are the result of centuries of human interaction with nature, are now falling into disrepair. Without the local population to manage them, the forests become overgrown, increasing the risk of landslides and reducing biodiversity. The empty land, once a carefully tended resource, risks becoming a neglected wilderness. The extreme concentration in the cities has also led to a cultural countermovement. Many urban Japanese, suffering from the stress and anonymity of hyperdensity, are beginning to look towards the Anaka for a sense of authenticity, community, and a slower pace of life. This has fueled a niche market for rural tourism and a small but growing trend of U-turn or I-turn migration, where people return to their hometowns or move to a new rural area, respectively. However, this movement is not large enough to reverse the demographic tide. It highlights a fundamental tension. The urban centers provide the economic engine, but the empty countryside holds the cultural soul and the ecological stability of the nation. The claim that 90% of Japan is empty is a powerful, concise summary of a complex reality. It is a reality defined by the relentless pressure of its mountainous terrain, which has compressed its population into a few coastal slivers. This compression was then amplified by decades of centralized economic policy, creating the colossal urban corridor of the Taiheiyo Belt. Finally, the current demographic crisis is hollowing out the remaining rural communities, turning the physical emptiness of the mountains into the social emptiness of abandoned towns. Japan's future will be defined by its ability to manage this paradox. The challenge is not merely to fill the empty spaces, but to find a sustainable balance between the hyperdensity of its cities and the quiet, essential vastness of its countryside. The health of the crowded 10% depends on the vitality of the empty 90%. The government strategies, from the limited success of IKEA banks to the rational but painful logic of the compact city model, are attempts to manage an inevitable decline in the periphery while preserving the core. As the nation continues to navigate its demographic destiny, the silent majority of its land, the mountains, the forests, and the IKEA, will remain the most profound and telling feature of the Japanese landscape, a constant reminder that even the most advanced societies are ultimately shaped by the unyielding forces of geography and demography.